Mesachas Kesubos Daf Kuf Gimel is a very lengthy daf containing a number of sugyas as well as lengthy agadata about Yehuda Nasi. We'll have one Mishnah. We'll start off with a question which we try to prove from our last Mishnah. Then we'll introduce the next Mishnah, and we will discuss a number of halachas related to it before we get into the agadata. So let's begin with the case. The case is that there was a fellow who owned a mill and he rented it out to somebody else. That person worked for others. He rented out his grinding time. He would grind flour and he would do that for hire, and that was how he made his living. So the deal that they made was that the rent that he was going to pay was, since he's grinding all the time anyway, he's going to pay rent by giving ground flour to the owner of the mill. Now, what ended up happening was that the mill owner himself made some money. He got rich, and he was able to buy his own other mill and a donkey to do the grinding. So he didn't need the grinding from his renter anymore. So he said to the renter, instead of giving me flour, I want you to give me money. So the guy said, I don't have money to give you. I have grinding to give you. I can give you grinding. So I'm going to continue giving the grinding as was my original deal. The other one said, no, I allowed you to give me grinding, but when I don't need it anymore, you have to give me the money. So they had this dispute, and they went to Ravina, and Ravina wanted to try to prove it from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah had said that if you have a situation where two men are both obligated to support one girl, they were two husbands for the mother of the girl, one after the other, obviously, and they both accepted upon themselves to support the daughter. So one of them gives actual food, and the other one gives money. So you see that you don't give food, you don't give the physical gain in a case where it's not needed. In a case where you owe somebody something and they don't need it because they have it from somewhere else, you give them money instead. So in our case also, even though they made a deal that he was going to grind for him, he didn't need his grinding anymore, should have to give him money instead. So Gemara says that you can't prove anything from there. Rav Avira said to Ravina, you can't prove from there, because first of all, in that case, there'd be no point in giving her more food. She only has one stomach, she can't eat more. It's not going to have any effect. You have to make them give her money instead. However, in this case, why does the guy not want to accept grinding? Let him take his own mill and let him rent that out to somebody else, or let him sell the grinding that mill does, and then he could have that. His renter is going to grind for him. There's no reason that can't happen as well. That would be a valid thing. Now, therefore, the Gemara seems to be leaning towards saying that the renter could insist that he only wants to grind, he doesn't want to pay cash. The Gemara says that's only if he doesn't have enough work. If he doesn't have enough work, he doesn't have enough people who are hiring him to grind for them, and therefore he's spending some of his time not working, he can say, I want to use the time that I have to work for you to pay off the rent for you. I don't want to have to give you money. So the Gemara says, if, however, he has a full slate and he wants to take some of his time working for this guy instead of working for someone else to make money, so why doesn't he just work for someone else, take the money and pay the rent? It's what's called Zen Nenev Zelechaser. He would gain. That is, the person who's renting, the owner of the mill, would gain and the renter would not lose. And somebody who doesn't want to do something that he is a favor for someone else and he himself doesn't lose, that's Midas Sedaim. That's what they did in Staim, and we force them to cooperate. All right, now we get to our Mishnah. So the Mishnah discusses which house the Almana is allowed to live in when she's being supported by the Yarshim of her husband. So first of all, what if she insists she wants to live in her husband's house, in her dead husband's house? So there, the Yarshim cannot push her out. They can't say, go to your father's house, I'm going to feed you there. They have to feed her wherever she wants to be, because that's part of her deal. She has a right to stay in the house. And she has a right to stay in the house under the living conditions that are in keeping with her honor. If, however, she says she wants to go to her father's house, she wants to go home, and she doesn't want to stay in her husband's house, there the Yarshim can force her. They can't say, they are allowed to say, we're not going to feed you unless you come live with us. It's cheaper for us to feed you here, and therefore we don't want to send food to you in your house. Now, if, however, she doesn't want to live there because she's young and they're young, and she's afraid for her safety, that's different, and then she has a right to insist she wants to go to her father's house. All right, the Gemara begins with the Brisa. The Brisa says that she's allowed to insist on everything that she had in the time of her husband. She can live in his house the way that she lived while he was alive. She can use the avadim and the shvachos just like she used while he was alive. She used the pillows and blankets. She used the gold and silver, kalim, All these things she gets to keep the standard that she had while he was alive, and that's because he wrote her in a ksuba, you're going to live in my house, and you're going to be supported from my property all the time of your almonos, all the time of your widowhood in my house. So you see that she has a right to stay in all those conditions. Now, Rav Yosef made a point, though. It says in the ksuba, bevesi, in my house, it's only if he has a house that has enough room for her and for the yarshim. If he has a house that's too small, it doesn't say in my caravan, it doesn't say in my hut. If there's not enough room, he did not intend to promise her that he was going to kick out his own kids from the house and allow her to stay there. So in that case, she has to go find a different place to live. Now, the Gemara now discusses what happens if the Yisomim want to sell the property that she has a right to keep. So let's say she wanted to stay in the house, and the Yisomim went and sold the house. So Rav Nachman says it doesn't count. The sale is void. So Gemara asks, how is it different in the case of Ravasi in the name of Rav Yochanan, where the halacha is that if there's not enough money for the Yisomim and for the wife to both be supported, then the Yisomim have to go door to door, and the wife gets to keep the money. She gets to keep the property. However, if they sold it, the sale counts. So how come there the sale of what's supposed to belong to the Almana counts, but the house, if she wants to stay in the house, the sale of that does not count? So Gemara says the difference is because the house is meshupah to her from before the death of her husband. It's in the ksuba, it's written there, and she's going to get to keep it. However, who gets the property and how we split the property, that is only something that becomes a question after he dies. And therefore they have a right to sell it at that time if they sold it right at the beginning before it was arranged who's going to get what. Now, says Abai halacha, if the house fell down, if it collapsed, then the Yarshim cannot be obligated to rebuild it. We learn a Brisa that says that as well. If the Almana's house fell, it collapsed, the Yarshim are not obligated to rebuild it. Not only that, but even if she says, let me alone, I'm going to rebuild it myself, I'll hire somebody to build it, we don't allow her to do that. It's not her property, and she doesn't have a right to rebuild it. Now, if, however, she invested money in it, she fixed it up, does she have a right to stay there? And does she have a right to insist that they can't send her out? Or do we say, no, you didn't have a right to do that, and therefore it doesn't change your right? So that the Gemara says a teiku with the question that's going to stand. We don't have an answer. Now, what happens if as we saw in the Mishnah, what happens if she says she wants to go home and they say, no, we want you to stay here, we'll feed you here, so she has to stay. Says Gemara, why can't they feed her just as well at home? So Gemara says this is a proof to Rav Huna, who says that there is an extra bracha on a house with more people who live there. They help each other, they're more efficient in their work, therefore there's a bracha on a house if there's people there, and therefore they want her around. Now, says the Gemara, let them give her incommensurate with the amount of bracha. Let them say, listen, we're going to deduct some because we're losing from the bracha that you would have brought to our house. Someone says yes. If they want, if she's agreeable and they're agreeable, that they would be able to do that, and then she can stay in the father's house, that would be fine. Now, says the Gemara, you can learn three things out of the lashon of chachamim. That is, in the discussion of halacha, you can learn three things. You can learn how to get rich, you can learn some cures, and you can learn bracha. What's bracha? Bracha is what we just said here. We see from this Mishnah that you get a bracha if there's a lot of people living together. How do you see about money management, about wealth? So that's from a Mishnah that says that somebody sells fruit to his friend, so he gives him the money, but he doesn't make a kinyan when he gives the money. The money is not kana. When does he make a kinyan? If he does a mashicha, if he just measures it out without doing mashicha, he's not kona. He has to actually pull it or take it towards him. So he says, what happens if he bought a lot of fruit and he does not have time to do a mashicha on all of it? So if he'll be smart, the Mishnah says he should rent the place under it. Then the land belongs to him, and his land, which is now his, is kona, all the fruits which are on it. Now, says Umar, where do you see healing? Where do you see medical treatment from a Mishnah? It's a Mishnah that says that a person should not chew wheat and put it on a wound on Pesach because the wheat from his saliva will become chametz. So you see from there that chewed up wheat put on a wound has healing properties. And now the Gemara goes into an agadata about Rav Yehuda Nasi. So the Gemara says the time of the passing of Rav Yehuda Nasi, he said there was a number of people he asked to speak to. First of all, he said, I need to see my sons. So his sons came into him, and he said to them, first of all, be careful with the honor of your mother. Now, I always want a light to be burning at my seat. The table should be set with my place. This is referring to Shabbos. We shall see his chair, the bed should all be set up, just like everything. And then he said, Yosef Chafni, Yosef of Haifa, and Shimon of Frasi, Shimon of Efrad, they're going to serve me in my lifetime. They served me in my lifetime, and they will serve me in death. Now, the Gemara explains this once a bit of time. First of all, he said they should be careful with the honor of their mother. Says the Gemara, what is he telling them? It's a mitzvah daraisa. It says, "Kavod es avicha v'esimecha." You have to be careful with your mother's honor. So Gemara said, the Gemara answers that it wasn't their real mother. He said, your mother didn't mean your real mother, it meant your stepmother. This was his wife who was not their mother, and therefore you don't have the mitzvah daraisa of kavod es avicha v'esimecha. So Gemara asks, what do you mean? You do. You have the extra s. It says kavod es avicha v'esimecha. The extra s is to include one's parent's spouse, even if it's not his own parent specifically. So you see that there is the obligation to cover there. So that same brisa continues, and it says the extra vav in ve'esimecha is to include an older sibling. So Gemara says that's true, but that's only while the parent is alive. That's when you're obligated to honor his or her spouse. The parent themselves are not alive, then the obligation to honor the spouse does not exist because it's not a real innate obligation, it's just an obligation for the honor of the parent themselves that you honor their spouse. All right, now why do you want everything to be set for him? The light, the candle, the place setting, the chair, the bed. So the Gemara says because he would come home even after he died. He came home every Friday night, came to his house. It's cool that he made Kiddush there as well. Now there was one Friday night that a neighbor came and was calling by the gate. She was knocking by the gate and she was asking to speak to the family, and the maidservant came out and said, "Be quiet, Rebbe's here." When she saw that, she didn't come anymore because that would give a bad reputation to all those tzaddikim who did not come back Friday night to their families, and she didn't want to give that impression. Okay, says the Gemara, he said that Shimon HaChafni, Yosef HaChafni and Shimon HaEphrati are supposed to serve him. So the Gemara says everybody thought that means that they're going to serve him in this world after he dies. That is, they're going to take care of the kvura, the burial, but they ended up dying shortly after he did, and their own burial preceded his burial. So they didn't help with his burial at all. So the Gemara says, so then what does it mean? It meant that they were going to help him in Olam Haba. And the reason that he was saying that is because he knew that they were going to die right after him, and he was afraid that people would say that they really deserved to die much earlier and there was something wrong with them. The only reason they stayed alive was in the schos of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, which is why as soon as he died, they died. In order that people shouldn't say that, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, no, they're going to actually have to come serve me, and that's why they're going to die right after me. All right, back to the story of the death of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He said, I need to speak to Chachmei Yisrael. Chachmei Yisrael came in to speak to him, and he said, do not give a hesped, do not eulogize me in the cities, the large cities of the Eretz Yisrael. Also, he said, after I die, let 30 days of mourning go by, and then they should set up a yeshiva on my grave. Shimon, my son, should be the Chacham. Gamliel, my son, should be the Nasi. And Chanina Bar Chama should be the Rosh Yeshiva. Now, the Gemara discusses this one by one. So he said not to mourn him in the cities. So they thought it was because of Tircha. He didn't want people to have to come to the cities from the little villages. And therefore he said, don't mourn me there. Don't do him for me there. But then people saw that they were actually mourning him, and all the little villages themselves, they're doing their own him. So they understood it was not because he didn't want to bother them to come to the cities, it was because of kavod. That's why he said not to mourn him in the cities themselves. All right, next he said they should put a yeshiva on his grave after 30 days. And it's because he's not better than Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, it says that Klal Yisrael mourned him for 30 days in Aros Moav. 30 days they mourned him by day and by night. After that, they only mourned him either by day and learned by night, or they mourned by night and learned by day. And the rest of the time, this is how they continued for the first 12 months after the 30 days were over. Now, the day that Rebbe had passed away, there was a Baskel who came out of Shemayim and said anybody who was there, anybody who saw him, spoke with him on the day that he died, is coming straight to Olam Haba. So there was a washer who was there every single day, and then that day he did not come, so he was very upset. So when he heard that, he went up to the roof and he fell off and he died from upsetness that he'd missed the day at which he could have got himself promised on Haba. But a Baskel came out and said this washer, is also going to go straight to Olam Haba. All right. Next, he had said, Shimon, my son, is Chacham, but Rabbi Gamliel, my son, should be the Nasi. So Mar wants to know what does he mean. What was he saying? Shimon, my son, is a Chacham. Mar explains, he said, even though my son Shimon is a Chacham, Gamliel, my son, should be the Nasi. Despite the fact that he is Chacham, still Gamliel is the one who should be the Nasi. So the Gemara says that Levi said, why did they have to say that? Obviously, even though Rabbi Shimon ben Rebbe was the Chacham, but Rabbi Gamliel was the Bechar. Bechar should for sure be. So Shimon bar Rebbe himself answered, you need this and the limp. Meaning he said to Levi, who asked the question, we need you and your limp. Levi is the one who limped. The Gemara says in Brachos that Levi showed how to do a certain avodas or an ishtachava, and it caused him to limp. So the Gemara says, what was the question? What was he asking? He was asking because it says, so you see that you give Yehoram to be the king after his father because he was the Bechar. So too, Rabbi Gamliel obviously should be the Bechar because he was, Rabbi Gamliel obviously should be the Nasi because he was the Bechar. The Gemara says, that's not a kasha. He, Yehoram, was fully in place of his father. He took over his father completely, and he fulfilled all his roles and all his minhagim. Gamliel was not fully in place of his father. Now, why did Rebbe do that then? If Rabban Gamliel did not fully fulfill the shoes of his father, so because he didn't fulfill the shoes of his father in Chachma, Rabbi Shimon was better in Chachma, but he did fully fulfill the shoes of his father in Yiras Chet, in fear of sin. All right, next thing Rabbi said was that Chanina bar Chama should be the Rosh Hashiva, should be the head. So Gemara says that Rabbi Chanina was not Makabal, that Rabbi Afas was greater than him for 2 years. Rabbi Afas sat as Rosh Hashiva for 2.5 years, and Rabbi Chanina therefore sat outside the Beis Medrash. Levi came and was sitting together with him, and he was learning with him. Then when Rabbi Afas died, Rabbi Chanina went inside, and Levi no longer had anybody to sit with, and therefore he went to Bavel. And that's what was being said to Rav. Rav was told that there's a great man who came from Narda, and he's limping. That's Levi. And he was saying that you're allowed to wear a klila. A woman is allowed to wear a headdress called a klila on Shabbos because she's chashav and she's not going to take it off to show it to anybody and end up carrying it. So he said, so you see from this, Rabbi Afas has died. Why? Because it must be that since Rabbi Afas had died, Rabbi Chanina is now the Rosh Hashiva, and therefore he's not outside, and therefore Levi has no one to sit with, and he's coming here, and this is what he means to say. So the Gemara says, so how do you know that means that Rabbi Afas had died? Maybe it was Rabbi Chanina who died, and Levi has no one left to talk to. And maybe Rabbi Afas is still alive, and he is where he is. So the Gemara offers 2 answers to that. Either Rabbi Afas would not have been a problem for Levi. Levi would have been subjugated himself to Rabbi Afas if he was still alive and he was Rosh Hashiva, would have stayed and gone inside to him. Or, I'll tell you a different answer, since Rabbi Chanina bar Chama was told by Rebbe that he was going to be the Rosh Hashiva, it couldn't be that he died without ever becoming Rosh Hashiva. Therefore, if he's not learning with Levi, it must be that he is Rosh Hashiva and he went inside. You might not ask, why did Rebbe make Rabbi Chia to be Rosh Hashiva or the Nasi? Rabbi Chia was alive and he was greater, so he should be Rosh Hashiva, Rashi says was the kasha. So the Gemara explains that Rabbi Chia had died, actually. He was not alive. Someone says, that can't be. Rabbi Chia said, I saw the grave of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and I dropped tears on it. So you see that he was alive at the time that Rebbe died. Someone says, no, change it around. It was Rebbe who said that I saw the grave of Rabbi Chia, and Rebbe had outlived Rabbi Chia. Gemara asks, but Rabbi Chia says the day that Rebbe had died, Kedusha ended. So obviously Rabbi Chia was alive when Rebbe died. So there's no, again, switch it around. It's Rabbi Yehuda who said, it's Rebbe who said that about Rabbi Chia. So Gemara says, but there's a brisa. The brisa says that when Rebbe got sick, Rabbi Chia came in to visit him, and he found that he was crying. And he said to them, Rebbe, why are you crying? And now the Gemara brings the lengthy brisa, which includes the statement that you shouldn't cry when you're dying. And that's all kinds of simanim when a person dies as to what his mazel is. So if he dies while he's laughing, it's a good sign. If he dies while he's crying, it's a bad sign, and that's why Rebbe shouldn't be crying. If he's faced up, it's a good sign. If he's face down, it's a bad sign. If he's facing the people, it's a good sign. If he's facing the wall, it's a bad sign. If his face is green, it's a bad sign. If his face is yellow or red, it's a good sign. If it's an Erev Shabbos, it's a good sign. If it's Matzah Shabbos, it's a bad sign. If it's Erev Kippur, it's a bad sign. If it's Matzah Yom Kippur, it's a good sign. If he has a stomach disease and that's what causes him to die, that's a good sign, because the majority of tzaddikim die because of stomach diseases. So anyway, so Rabbi had asked Rebbe, why are you crying? So he said, I'm crying over the Torah and mitzvahs that I'm losing, that I won't be able to do in this world anymore. Umar answers, either you have to switch this again, and again it was Rebbe talking to Rebbe Chia, not the other way around, or I'll tell you a whole new answer. You don't have to switch it. Really, Rebbe Chia did outlive Rebbe, but Rebbe did not want to appoint him as Rosh Hashiva because he did not want to disturb his learning. The Gemara says, you see that because Rebbe Chia and Rebbe Chia were once in an argument, and Rebbe Chanina said to Rebbe Chia, you're arguing with me, don't argue with me, because if Chas v'Shalom Torah was forgotten from Yisrael, said Rebbe Chanina, I would be able to restore it all with my pilpul. And then Rebbe Chia said, I am working, the Torah should never be forgotten from Yisrael, because what do? I plant flax, and I pick the flax, and I weave nets. I use the nets to catch deer, and I feed the meat of the deer to Yisomim, and I use the skin to make parchment. I take the parchment and I make it into Sfarim, and I go to the city, and to a city that has no teachers, and I write Chamishachim Shei Torah for 5 children on these parchments, and I write and I teach them the 6 Sidrei Mishnayos to the children, 1 to each of them, and then I tell them, each of them teach to your friend. So each one teaches one that he knew to the other ones, and in this way they end up knowing Chamishachim Shei Torah and Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. And that's what Rebbe said. How great are the works of Rebbe? Rav Shimon bar Rebbe said it's greater even than yours, and he said yes, greater than mine. He said Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yossi said, is it even greater than my father? He said Chas v'Shalom, I would never say such a thing. It's not greater than your father. Umar now returns to what happened on the day of the death of Rabbi. So the next thing he said was, I need to speak to my young son. So Rabbi Shimon, his youngest son, came in and he gave him the secrets of wisdom. Then he said, I need to speak to my older son. Rabbi Gamliel came in and he gave him the secrets of being the leader, of being the Nasi. He said, my son, run your leadership with haughtiness, with high-handedness, meaning you should sit between the leaders. And you should throw fear into the Talmidim. You should command and demand a certain amount of respect. Somebody asked, is that so? But it says, Ve'esiras Hashem Yechabed. And we learned that that's Yoshafat, king of Yehuda. That when he would see Talmid Chacham, he would stand from his chair and hug him and kiss him and call him Rebbe, Rebbe, my master, my master. So you see that he did not show fear to the Talmidei Chachamim. Because it's not a kasha, that was in private when no one else was looking, but before Hesia, he would run with a certain amount of awe. Now, the Gemara continues with the story of the death of Rebbe. The Gemara says that Rebbe was lying in Tzipori, but his burial ground was in Beit She'arim. So the Gemara asks, but it says that Tirdaif went after Rebbe to Beit She'arim. So the Gemara explains that, so you see from there the kasha is that Rebbe did seem to travel to Beis She'arim in his lifetime. So the Gemara answers that he really was in Beis She'arim, and that's where he really lived and he was, but he was moved to Tzipori when he got sick, because Tzipori is high elevation and it has good sweet air.